For over a century, fascism has declared itself to be the resolute enemy of liberalism, but few people have ever stopped to ask what this means. As this video will uncover, in declaring itself to be the resolute enemy of contemporary liberalism, fascist ideology intended not to turn towards reaction, but rather to spring forward into a new modernity, and as fascist Italy's leading intellectuals described, a new liberalism. Though this may sound contradictory at first glance, one must recognize that in opposing itself to liberalism writ large, fascism saw itself in fact as saving the liberal tradition from some of its more misguided tendencies. Upon delving into the literature of fascism's leading theoreticians, the conclusion that fascism saw itself within a broader wellspring of liberal ideals becomes inescapable. To understand this fact completely, one must understand the 19th century worldview of the revolutionary Italian nationalist, liberal, Freemason, and primary architect of the unification of Italy, Giuseppe Mazzini, who lived from 1805 until 1872. At the base of Mazzini's ideology was the belief that the liberation of Italy could only occur through the foundation of a unitary republican state, and that its national identity needed to be formed with a deeply ingrained faith based upon a secular religion. Convicted of his Italian nationalism and his belief in fraternity and communitarian values, Mazzini opposed communism, regarding it as an exclusionary ideology. Though he was an opponent of institutionalized religions, such as Catholicism, Mazzini believed that religion was necessary for mankind in some way or another. Man needed to understand that there was a transcendent and divine element within his own heart. According to Mazzini, the people could not progress, much less have meaningful freedom, if they did not have a sense of something greater than or beyond themselves. And so, to accompany rights and freedoms, the people needed to uphold duties as well. Palmiro Togliatti, Italy's leading communist organizer for a time, commented on the connection between Mazzini and the fascist movement, stating, quote, "The tradition of the Risorgimento, the unification of Italy, therefore lives on in fascism, and has been developed by it to the extreme. Mazzini, if he were alive, would applaud the corporative doctrines, nor would he reject Mussolini's speeches on the function of Italy in the world. The anti-fascist revolution can only be a revolution against the Risorgimento, against its ideology, against its politics, against the solution it gave to the problem of the unity of the state and to all the problems of national life." Unquote. This is what brings us to Giovanni Gentile, the philosopher of fascism. Gentile found inspiration in Mazzini's spiritualism, his belief in the use of mass education to create a new man, and his sense of civic duty, in which Gentile found the primitive predecessor of the fascist concept of the ethical state. In his 1929 work, Origins and Doctrine of Fascism, Giovanni Gentile would write, quote, "The transcendent conception that rules over the Catholic Church contradicts the immanentist character of the political conception of fascism, which, as has been said, far from being the negation of liberalism and democracy, which even the leaders of fascism have regularly repeated for polemical reasons, actually aspires to be the most perfect form of liberalism and democracy, in conformity with the doctrine of Mazzini, to whose spirit fascism has returned." Unquote. Within this same work, Gentile declared that the fascist state was, to quote, "more liberal than the liberal state itself." The distinction, however, between the old classical liberalism of the antiquated Western European democracies and the novel fascist liberalism taking shape in Italy was that fascist liberalism saw the state and individual liberty as complementary. Beyond this, under fascism, the totalitarian state was one with the individual. This is why the fascists believed that a new corporative state, inclusive of all particular interests, was necessary to represent the totality of national life. Through this corporative state, the contradiction between the ruler and the ruled would collapse, ushering in a new era in which the state did not merely represent the people, but was synonymous with the people. Whatever the people demanded was a demand of the state, and vice versa. This is why Giovanni Gentile saw the fascist model as democracy par excellence. This corporative state would organize the productive classes into a single political community, thereby creating, in Giovanni Gentile's words, quote, "a perfection of the representative system which the liberal state could not even imagine." Unquote. Gentile was certain that fascism embodied a higher liberalism rooted in Italian and German liberal traditions in which the state and citizen could form a common will. This liberalism was to be distinguished from the false individualistic liberalism, classical liberalism, born of the English tradition. As Gentile characterized it, within classical liberalism, quote, "the state is seen as a means, not an end. It limits itself to the maintenance of public order, excluding itself from the entirety of spiritual life, which therefore remains exclusively a sphere restricted to the individual conscience." Unquote. In his essay titled My Liberalism, Gentile declared, quote, "My liberalism, need I say it, is not the first. It is not the doctrine that denies, but the one that vigorously affirms the state as an ethical reality. This liberal state, moreover, does not absorb or annihilate the individual as the timid liberal of individualism fears. The politics of this liberalism is certainly not the great party or lottery that is the politics of vulgar democracy, all prudence or candor. I am firmly convinced of the supreme necessity of a strong state, of the need to awaken and develop in politics an energetic sense of religiosity and morality, and on the other hand, to bring a sense of social and historical concreteness to the ethical religious development of the individual. This is the essence of my liberalism." Unquote. Fascist liberalism, like all forms of liberalism, testified that it viewed liberty as the supreme end, but that, unlike classical liberalism, under the fascist system, liberty would be realized through the state rather than in spite of it. According to Gentile, the state is not a superstructure which imposes itself from without. Rather, the state is the very essence of the individual himself. One should not be confused by this statement. In fascism, the state is not synonymous with the government. The state is synonymous with the masses. If one does not understand this about fascism, they will not understand anything about fascism. According to Sergio Pannunzio, a deputy in the Kingdom of Italy from 1924 to 1939 and one of fascist Italy's leading theorists, quote, "The path on which fascism walks is not the path of Asia, but the path of law and liberalism," unquote. Pannunzio believed that true freedom could only be achieved by an order, discipline, and hierarchy guaranteed by an ordered and balanced legal system, and indeed, fascist Italy maintained such a legal system in practice. The fascist penal code of Alfredo Rocco was revised by a parliamentary commission before enactment. This penal code unified Italian law, introduced new labor courts, and grounded itself in positivist legal theory. In another instance, from 1928 onwards, all executive decrees required submission to the Grand Council of Fascism and to Parliament for confirmation. A failure to repass them within 2 years would void the decrees. This ordered, disciplined, and hierarchical legal system ensured that fascism maintained the rule of law over the rule of a single man. Though some would argue that the Parliament and Grand Council were merely rubber stamp machines, history shows this to be a complete misapprehension. Parliament was dominated by representatives of Italy's various productive trade associations, which were elected through overwhelming popular approval in 1929 and 1934. Through the elimination of competitive party politics and its replacement with a vocational system, the Grand Council of Fascism, which vetted all candidates prior, was incentivized to ensure that proposed representatives were slated based upon their merits and capabilities. This system was arguably much more democratic than the preceding parliamentarian system, as it removed the geographical basis of voting, cut out the special interests which maintained control over particular political parties, and placed both voting and legal representation firmly on an occupational basis. Despite the fact that the Grand Council of Fascism was appointed, this never stopped the council from opposing Benito Mussolini's activities. Italo Balbo, one of the most important members of the council, was vocally opposed to Mussolini's Pact of Steel, as well as Italy's entry into World War II. The Grand Council was deeply divided over the implementation of the racial laws of 1938, and ultimately it was the Grand Council itself that deposed Benito Mussolini from power in 1943. Even Benito Mussolini himself declared the innately liberal nature of fascism. On the eve of power in 1922, he told the Manchester Guardian that fascist policy will be entirely liberal and would welcome the collaboration of everyone and also of our opponents, a statement that indeed came true when the fascists collaborated with the liberal economist De Stefani for a time, added liberal jurists and politicians to the 1925 Commission, allowed dissident intransigent fascists from the National Fasci to remain in parliament for years, and attempted to forge a pact of pacification with the Italian Socialist Party. Giovanni Gentile insisted that liberty and freedom remained the critical center of fascist revolutionary thought. The fascist jurist Alfredo Rocco argued in 1919 that Italy's political action was not about individual rights at all, but, quote, "the development of the nation, not conceived as a sum of individuals, but as the historical result of the succession of generations," unquote. Generations, mind you, which had been steeped in liberal political traditions. To Rocco and his followers, organic national unity was simply a truer form of collective freedom than the old liberal focus on atomized individuals. The fascists proclaimed that universal liberties, including speech and association, would survive under fascism only insofar as they served the common will, a notion which notably ran in lockstep with the Jacobin concept of liberty harnessed by law. As strange as it may sound to some, the fascists traced their tradition back to the French Revolution. Like the Jacobins of 1790s France, Mussolini's regime idolized the nation-state as a single moral community, transcending class boundaries and superseding class struggle. Giovanni Gentile's definition of liberalism, which was liberty as duty produced by social education and manifested through the rule of law, was undoubtedly rooted in the liberal theories of Rousseau and his idea of the general will. Gentile was a firm believer in individual rights, insisting that such rights are indeed real insofar as they are absorbed into the will of the people. Beyond the realm of theory, the fascist movement adopted the symbol of the fasces with the explicit goal in mind of imitating the French Revolution. Before having adopted the fasces, the fascists actually used the beehive as their symbol. Even the Fascist Party in France used the fasces as their symbol from 1925 until their dissolution in 1928. Even after the dissolution of the French Fascist Party, its founder, Georges Valois, maintained his enthusiasm regarding the French Revolution. Guess where the fascist salute comes from? Ancient Rome? The tennis court oath, which occurred during the French Revolution. Though fascism did indeed break with classical liberalism, many liberal elites were still of the opinion that fascism was a useful ally as a battering ram against socialism, despite fascism's aims going far beyond militia purposes. Upon achieving power, these old liberal political elites were no longer at the helm of the Italian state, and during the 1930s, private companies in essential sectors became subject to mass expropriation and nationalization. If the fascists could be called the armed wing of the bourgeoisie during the Biennio Rosso, as Marxists claim, such a statement could no longer be made with any serious confidence following the mid-1920s. Now, beyond aesthetics or legal and political philosophy, fascism was also embedded within ideologically liberal societies, such as Freemasonry. Cesare Rossi, a fascist of the first hour, was a Freemason. Umberto Pasella, a secretary of the Fasci di Combattimento, was a Freemason. By the way, the premises of the Fasci di Combattimento were first rented from a Jewish Freemason named Cesare Goldman. Alceste de Ambris, one of the authors of the Fascist Manifesto of 1919, was a Freemason. Gabriele D'Annunzio, the leader of the Regency of Cornaro, a Freemason. Giacomo Acerbo, the man who drafted the Acerbo Law, a Freemason. Edmondo Rossoni, the poster boy for fascist syndicalism, a Freemason. Aldo Finzi, Freemason. Licio Gelli, a Freemason. In fact, if one would like to look outside of Italy and to Argentina, one would find that it was Licio Gelli himself, in fact, who initiated Juan Perón, the fascist leader of Argentina, into Freemasonry in 1973. We can further turn to the last president of the Free State of Fiume and Mussolini's Minister of Public Works, Giovanni Giuseppe, who was a Freemason. Or we can turn to Harold di Crollalanza, another Minister of Public Works under fascism. We also have Luigi Razza, a secretary of the Fasci of Revolutionary Action, as well as a participant in the founding of the Italian Fasci di Combattimento and Secretary of Public Works, who was also, just guess, there's also Mussolini's Minister of Industry and Commerce, Teofilo Rossi, Minister of National Economy, Orso Mario Corbino, Minister of Education, Giuseppe Beluzzo, or Minister of Justice, Aldo Oviglio. The Minister of War, Armando Diaz, though unconfirmed, was allegedly a Freemason, and if he were to be, at this point, would it really come as any surprise? I'm going to stop the list there because I'm not even halfway done, and I don't want to turn this into a video about fascism's connections with Freemasonry, which could be at least an hour long. Upon the establishment of the fascist state, Freemasonry was outlawed only because all secret societies were outlawed by a broad decree. Freemasonry was not singled out, and the Freemasons involved in the fascist movement believed that fascism had entirely fulfilled the ethical and fraternal goals of Freemasonry. Even in the realm of the economy, fascism applauded its own congruence with certain strands of liberal economics, with Mussolini declaring, quote, "Fascism entirely agrees with Mr. Maynard Keynes," despite the latter's prominent position as a liberal. In fact, Mr. Keynes's excellent little book, The End of Laissez-Faire, 1926, might, so far as it goes, serve as a useful introduction to fascist economics. There is scarcely anything to object to in it, and there is so much to applaud. Unquote. Throughout its rule in Italy, Spain, Austria, and other states, fascism adopted or coincided with essentially all of the economic stances of John Maynard Keynes. Beyond that, there is something of interest to be noted in Keynes's own political activities back home in Britain. In late 1930, Keynes had started meeting with then Labourite and future leader of the British Union of Fascists, Sir Oswald Mosley. When Mosley published his Mosley Memorandum that same year, Keynes declared, quote, "I do not see what practical socialism can mean for our generation in England unless it makes much of Oswald Mosley's manifesto its own, this peculiar British socialism." Unquote. When Mosley, in 1931, founded his New Party, as it was called, Harold Nicolson, who had dined out with Keynes, reported that, quote, "He would, without question, vote for it. He feels that our party may really do an immense amount of good, and that our program is more sound and certainly more daring than that which any other party can advance." Unquote. In 1933, Oswald Mosley wrote to Keynes, congratulating his fascist economic ideals. The liberalism of fascism was a new liberalism, and it intended not to continue the ways of the old state, but to finally resolve the problems most imminent in liberal society. To do this, it believed not in turning back to old political forms, but in constructing a new system that could transcend the stagnant talking shops of contemporary political life.